On February 7th, 1984, a man floated in space with nothing attaching him to anything. No human being had ever done before. He let go, he floated away from the shuttle using a device called the Manned Maneuvering Unit, essentially a jetpack, built into the backpack of his spacesuit with 24 small nitrogen gas thrusters that he controlled with joysticks mounted on the armrests. Farther and farther from the shuttle, past the end of the cargo bay, past the point where any tether would have reached out into nothing at his maximum distance. He was about 100 meters from the shuttle, 320 feet, the length of a football field. That doesn't sound like much, but think about what it means. There was no physical connection between Bruce McCandless and anything solid. The shuttle was behind him, a white shape against the black. Below him, if below means anything in orbit, was the Earth, blue and white and enormous, curving away in every direction. Above him was the universe, and between him and all of it was nothing, vacuum, the emptiest emptiness that exists. If the MMU had failed, if the thrusters had stopped working, if the control system had frozen, if something had gone catastrophically wrong, McCandless would have drifted. The shuttle could have maneuvered to retrieve him, probably. The crew had practiced rescue scenarios, but probably is not certainly, and in the seconds after he released his grip and floated free, Bruce McCandless was, in the most literal sense imaginable, alone. The photographs from that day are among the most iconic images in the history of human spaceflight. You've almost certainly seen them, a white figure against pure black, with the blue curve of the Earth below. The figure is small, absurdly small against the backdrop of the planet. There are no reference points, no structures, no horizon line, just a human being, suspended in nothing, held aloft by nothing, connected to nothing. I want you to imagine what that felt like, not the technical details, we'll get to those. I want you to imagine the sensation. You are moving at 17,500 miles per hour. You don't feel it. There's no wind, no vibration, no sense of speed. You're in free fall, which means you feel weightless. Your body floats inside the suit. Your arms drift upward unless you consciously hold them down. Your internal organs have shifted slightly. Your heart, your intestines, your blood, all redistributed by the absence of gravity. Your face is puffy because fluid has migrated toward your head. You look down past your boots and you see the Earth, not a photograph of the Earth, the actual Earth continents, oceans, cloud systems, thousands of miles across. The Terminator line, the boundary between day and night, cutting across the planet in a curve that you can see moving slowly as the Earth rotates beneath you. You're 200 miles above the surface, traveling fast enough to circle the planet in 90 minutes. You look up, or in the direction your helmet happens to be pointing, and you see stars, more stars than you've ever seen from the ground, because there's no atmosphere to scatter the light, no city glow to wash them out. The stars don't twinkle, they burn with steady, unwavering light, points of fusion fire scattered across a blackness, so absolute that it doesn't look like a color. It looks like an absence, the absence of everything. You look behind you and there's the shuttle. It's 100 meters away. It looks smaller than you expected. The cargo bay is open and you can see the other astronauts inside, tiny figures in white suits watching you, probably holding their breath. The shuttle is your home, your air, your water, your heat, your way back to Earth. All of it is in that machine. And you have deliberately moved away from it. Between you and the shuttle there is nothing. No air, no sound, no medium through which a cry for help could travel. If you screamed, the sound would vibrate inside your helmet, bounce off the visor, rattle in your own skull, but it would go no further. Sound does not travel in vacuum. You are surrounded by the most profound silence that exists. Not the silence of a quiet room which is still full of the faint hum of electronics, the whisper of air conditioning, the distant murmur of traffic. This is the silence of nothing, the silence of a universe that is, for all its vastness, almost entirely empty, and you are in it, you are part of that emptiness. A warm, breathing, thinking speck of biology in a mechanical shell, drifting through a void that would kill you in about 90 seconds if the shell failed. That last part is worth dwelling on because the lethality of space is not abstract, it's specific and it's fast. If your suit depressurized, a catastrophic failure of the pressure garment, a breach in the helmet seal, a rupture in the fabric, you would lose consciousness in about 10 to 15 seconds, not minutes, seconds. The oxygen in your lungs would rush out through the breach. The dissolved gases in your blood, primarily nitrogen, would begin to form bubbles, a condition called ebulism. Your blood would not boil in the dramatic movie sense, it's under enough pressure from your circulatory system to prevent that, but the moisture on your tongue, in your eyes, and on the surface of your lungs would vaporize. You would feel a bizarre, painful swelling as the gas bubbles expanded in your tissues. Your vision would darken as oxygen deprivation hit your brain. Within 15 seconds you would be unconscious. Within about 90 seconds you would be dead. This is not speculation. NASA has studied vacuum exposure extensively using both animal experiments and a small number of accidental human exposures. In 1966, a technician at the Johnson Space Center was exposed to near vacuum when his spacesuit failed during a chamber test. He remained conscious for about 14 seconds before losing consciousness. The chamber was repressurized within about 30 seconds and he survived without permanent injury. He later reported that the last thing he remembered was the sensation of water boiling on his tongue. Bruce McCandless knew all of this. Every astronaut knows it. They study the failure modes. They understand the physiology. They know exactly what would happen if their suit failed, and they know exactly how long they would have. They go outside anyway. This is the part of the story that I find most extraordinary. Not the technology, not the physics, the psychology, the act of a human being, looking at the void, knowing what it is, knowing what it can do, and choosing to enter it, choosing to let go of the last physical connection to safety and drift alone in nothing. What kind of person does that? What does it require psychologically, emotionally, spiritually to do what Bruce McCandless did? And what does the history of humans working in the vacuum of space tell us about ourselves, about our relationship with fear, with trust, with the unknown? Those are the questions I want to explore tonight. Because the story of spacewalking, of extravehicular activity, to use NASA's clinical term, is one of the most extraordinary stories in the history of human endeavor. It spans 60 years, involves hundreds of people, and includes moments of transcendence, terror, near death, and quiet, profound beauty. And it starts, as so many space stories do, with a Russian doing something that everyone else thought was impossible. March 18, 1965, the spacecraft is called Voskhod 2. Inside are two cosmonauts, Pavel Belyaev, the commander, and Alexei Leonov, the pilot. They have been in orbit for about 90 minutes, and now Leonov is going to do something that has never been done. He is going to open the hatch and go outside. The Voskhod 2 capsule was not designed for spacewalks. The Voskhod was a modified Vostok itself, a modified ballistic missile re-entry vehicle, hastily adapted to carry 2 or 3 cosmonauts instead of 1. For the Leonov spacewalk, the engineers added an inflatable airlock, a collapsible fabric tunnel attached to the side of the spacecraft that could be extended into space, allowing Leonov to exit without depressurizing the entire cabin. The airlock was about 2.5 meters long and about 1 meter in diameter. Leonov, in his bulky Berkut spacesuit, had to squeeze through it to reach the void. The suit was pressurized to about 0.4 atmospheres with pure oxygen, enough to keep him alive, but it made the suit rigid and inflexible. Moving in it was like moving inside an inflated balloon. At 11:34 Moscow time, Leonov pushed himself through the airlock and into space. He was the first human being to float freely in the vacuum of space outside a spacecraft. He was connected to the capsule by a 5-meter tether, and he carried a handheld camera to document the experience. The video and photographs from Leonov's spacewalk are grainy and limited. The technology of 1965 didn't allow for high-definition space photography, but they show a remarkable scene. A figure in a white suit tumbling slowly against the backdrop of the Earth, the tether trailing behind him like an umbilical cord. Leonov later described the experience in terms that are almost poetic. He spoke of the overwhelming silence, the intensity of the colors, the deep blue of the oceans, the white of the clouds, the absolute black of space. He said the Earth looked alive, breathing, luminous. He said he felt simultaneously terrified and exalted, and then everything went wrong in the vacuum of space. Leonov's suit began to expand. The internal pressure pushing outward against no external pressure inflated the suit like a balloon. His gloves swelled until he could no longer grip anything. His boots expanded until his feet floated free inside them. The suit became so rigid and bloated that he realized, with growing horror, that he could not fit back through the airlock. Think about that. The first human being to walk in space was trapped outside his spacecraft because his suit had inflated too much for him to get back in. Leonov made a decision that was either incredibly brave or incredibly desperate, probably both. Without consulting mission control, he partially depressurized his suit, reducing the internal pressure from 0.4 atmospheres to 0.27 atmospheres. This made the suit more flexible, but brought him dangerously close to the threshold for decompression sickness, the formation of gas bubbles in the blood that can cause excruciating pain, paralysis, and death. It was the bends, the same condition that threatens deep-sea divers who ascend too quickly. With the suit partially deflated, Leonov forced himself back through the airlock head first, which was the wrong orientation, requiring him to turn around inside the narrow tunnel. He was drenched in sweat. His core body temperature had risen dangerously. He later said he lost about 6 kilograms of body weight in sweat during the 12-minute spacewalk. He made it back inside, but the mission's problems weren't over. The airlock wouldn't fully retract. The hatch was difficult to seal. And during re-entry the next day, the automatic orientation system failed, and Belyaev had to manually control the descent, resulting in a landing hundreds of kilometers off target, in a dense forest in the Ural Mountains, in deep snow in wolf territory. The cosmonauts spent 2 nights in the frozen forest before rescue teams reached them. The Soviets, of course, announced the spacewalk as a triumphant success, which in a sense it was. Leonov had proven that a human being could survive and function in the vacuum of space, but the near disaster was kept secret for decades. The truth about how close Leonov came to dying, inflating, unable to re-enter, bleeding pressure from his suit like a last resort, only emerged years later. Alexei Leonov lived until 2019. He was 85 when he died. In his later years, he spoke openly about the terror of that first spacewalk and about the beauty of it. He said the two were inseparable, that the beauty was heightened by the terror, and the terror was made bearable by the beauty. He was also an accomplished painter, and he spent decades painting what he had seen, the Earth from space, the blackness, the stars. His paintings are not photorealistic, they're impressionistic, emotional, almost dreamlike. The colors are brighter than reality. The Earth glows. The void pulses with a kind of luminous darkness. They're the paintings of a man who saw something that words couldn't capture and spent the rest of his life trying to capture it anyway. 3 months after Leonov's spacewalk, the Americans followed. Ed White performed the first American EVA on June 3, 1965, during the Gemini 4 mission. White spent 23 minutes outside the spacecraft, maneuvering with a handheld gas gun, a much simpler device than the MMU that McCandless would use 19 years later. White was connected to the spacecraft by a tether and an umbilical that supplied oxygen. White's experience was, by all accounts, ecstatic. He described the spacewalk as the most comfortable part of the mission. When Mission Control told him it was time to come back in, he said, and this is a direct quote, "I'm coming back in, and it's the saddest moment of my life." Ed White was killed 2 years later on January 27, 1967 in the Apollo 1 fire. He was 36 years old. The early history of spacewalking is marked by this duality, exhilaration and danger, beauty and death. The astronauts who went outside reported experiences of overwhelming awe, and then sometimes things went wrong in ways that nearly killed them. The Gemini program, 10 crewed missions between 1965 and 1966, included several spacewalks that were, to put it bluntly, nightmares. Gemini 9, Gene Cernan's spacewalk, was so physically exhausting that Cernan's visor fogged over with condensation from his own sweat, blinding him. He couldn't see. He was outside the spacecraft, unable to see, his heart rate above 180 beats per minute, his suit's cooling system completely overwhelmed by the heat his body was generating from the effort of moving in a pressurized suit. He barely made it back inside. Gemini 11, Richard Gordon's spacewalk, was similarly brutal. Gordon was supposed to attach a tether between his spacecraft and an Agena target vehicle. The work required enormous physical effort, pushing, pulling, gripping, talking, all in a suit that fought every movement. He was so exhausted that sweat poured into his eyes, and he had to end the EVA early. These early spacewalks taught NASA a crucial lesson that seems obvious in hindsight but wasn't obvious at the time. Working in space is incredibly punishingly hard. The pressurized suit is your enemy as much as your protector. Every time you bend a joint, an elbow, a knee, a finger, you're working against the suit's internal pressure, which wants to hold the joint straight. It's like trying to bend an inflated tire. Your hands inside pressurized gloves must grip tools against a constant fatiguing resistance. Within minutes, your forearms burn with lactic acid. Within hours, if you last that long, your fingernails may separate from the nail beds from the constant pressure of gripping. Astronauts have compared spacewalking to running a marathon while wearing oven mitts and a suit of armor. It requires enormous upper body strength, core stability, and cardiovascular endurance. And it requires these things in an environment where you're simultaneously dealing with temperature extremes, communication delays, visor reflections, tool management, and the ever-present awareness that a single mistake could kill you. The solution that finally made spacewalking practical was developed by Buzz Aldrin for the Gemini 12 mission in November 1966. Aldrin, who had a doctorate in orbital mechanics from MIT, earning him the nickname Doctor, Rendezvous approached the problem of EVA work with an engineer's methodical precision. He trained underwater in a pool that simulated weightlessness, practicing every task until the movements were automatic. He designed foot restraints and handholds that allowed him to anchor his body while working. Rather than fighting to maintain position and grip simultaneously, he planned each task in detail, including rest periods. Aldrin's Gemini 12 EVA was a triumph. He spent over 5 hours outside the spacecraft performing tasks that had defeated previous astronauts, and he returned to the cabin in good condition, with his heart rate never exceeding normal working levels. The difference was preparation, training methodology, and tool design. Aldrin had proven that humans could work effectively in space, but only if the work was carefully designed around the limitations of the human body and the spacesuit. This lesson that EVA success depends on task design and training as much as on the astronaut's fitness has been the guiding principle of spacewalk planning ever since. Every EVA performed today is rehearsed dozens of times in the Neutral Buoyancy Laboratory at the Johnson Space Center, a swimming pool 40 feet deep and 200 feet long, containing a full-scale mock-up of the International Space Station's exterior. Astronauts spend 6 to 7 hours underwater for every hour they'll spend in space, practicing each task until it's second nature. The underwater training is as close to a spacewalk as you can get on Earth. But it's not perfect. Water provides resistance that vacuum doesn't. The buoyancy is adjusted by adding weights to the suit, but the dynamics are different in water. You feel drag when you move. In space, you don't. Tools behave differently underwater than in zero gravity. And the psychological reality of being in a swimming pool, surrounded by safety divers, is fundamentally different from the psychological reality of being outside the space station 250 miles above the Earth, with the universe in every direction. Let me talk about what modern spacewalking actually looks like, because it's both more routine and more dangerous than most people realize. As of early 2025, there have been over 270 spacewalks from the International Space Station alone. The ISS has required more EVA time than any other program in history, because the station was literally built by spacewalking astronauts. The massive truss structure, the solar arrays, the radiators, the docking adapters, all were installed during spacewalks that sometimes lasted 7 or 8 hours. A typical ISS spacewalk begins hours before the astronaut ever opens the hatch. The preparation process, called pre-breathe, involves breathing pure oxygen for several hours to purge nitrogen from the bloodstream. This is necessary because the spacesuit operates at a lower pressure than the station's cabin, about 4.3 pounds per square inch in the suit versus 14.7 psi in the station, roughly the same ratio as ascending to about 30,000 feet altitude. Without pre-breathing, the rapid pressure drop, when the suit is sealed, could cause nitrogen bubbles to form in the blood, decompression sickness. The pre-breathe protocol has evolved over the decades. Early protocols required up to 4 hours of pure oxygen breathing. Current protocols use a combination of exercise and oxygen breathing that can reduce the time, but it still adds hours to the EVA timeline. Once the pre-breathe is complete, the astronaut enters the airlock on the ISS. This is the Quest Joint Airlock, a cylindrical module with an inner hatch to the station and an outer hatch to space. They put on the suit, the Extravehicular Mobility Unit, or EMU, with the help of a fellow astronaut. The EMU is a complex, multi-layered garment that takes about 45 minutes to put on. It includes a liquid cooling garment worn against the skin, a pressure bladder that maintains the oxygen atmosphere, a restraint layer that prevents the pressure bladder from ballooning, thermal micrometeorite protection layers, an insulated outer shell, a helmet with a gold-coated sun visor, gloves that balance protection with dexterity, and a life support backpack, the primary life support system that provides oxygen, removes carbon dioxide, manages temperature, and supplies drinking water through a straw inside the helmet. The astronaut also puts on a diaper. This is not a joke. EVAs last 6 to 8 hours and there's no bathroom break. The maximum absorbency garment, which is exactly what it sounds like, is a standard part of the EVA ensemble. Astronauts don't talk about it much. It's one of those unglamorous realities of spaceflight that doesn't make it into the press releases. Once suited, the astronaut enters the airlock's crew lock, closes the inner hatch, and begins depressurization. The air is pumped out of the crew lock over about 30 minutes, slowly, to allow the astronaut's ears to adjust and to verify that the suit is holding pressure. When the pressure reaches vacuum, or as close to vacuum as the pump can achieve, the outer hatch is opened and then you're outside. Every astronaut who has performed an EVA describes the moment of opening the hatch as overwhelming, not because of the danger. By this point you've been in the suit for hours. The danger is abstract, but because of the view. One moment you're inside a metal cylinder surrounded by walls and equipment and artificial light. The next moment the hatch swings open and the universe is there, right there. The Earth below, the stars above, the station stretching away in both directions, all of it bathed in the brutal, unfiltered light of the sun, or plunged into the absolute darkness of orbital night. There is no gradual transition, no window to ease you into it. The hatch opens, and infinity is 6 inches from your face. Chris Hadfield, the Canadian astronaut who performed 2 spacewalks during shuttle missions, described the moment of looking down through the open hatch for the first time. He said his brain rebelled. Every instinct, every evolutionary circuit in his nervous system screamed that he was about to fall. He was looking down, straight down at the Earth. 250 miles below, there was nothing between him and the ground except vacuum. His hands gripped the hatch frame, his knuckles white inside the gloves, and he had to consciously override the primal terror of height that had kept his ancestors alive on the African savanna for millions of years. The fear of falling is one of the most deeply wired instincts in the human brain. It develops before we can walk. Infants as young as 6 months show fear responses when placed on a visual cliff, a glass surface with a visible drop beneath it. The response is not learned, it's innate, it's in the hardware. And in space, that hardware is wrong. You're falling, you're in free fall, which is what orbit is. But you will never hit the ground. The ground curves away from you as fast as you fall toward it. The fear of falling is evolutionarily useless in orbit. But evolution doesn't know that. Your brain sees the drop and panics. Hadfield said it took him several minutes to calm down enough to begin working. He focused on the tasks. He focused on his hands. He focused on the next handhold, the next foot restraint, the next step in the procedure. And gradually, not quickly, but gradually, the fear subsided, replaced by a focused professional attention to the work. Not every astronaut experiences the same intensity of fear. Some describe the moment of exiting as exhilarating from the start. Others describe a quiet, almost meditative calm. The variation is probably due to individual differences in anxiety response, prior experience, and the specific circumstances of the EVA. But the accounts are remarkably consistent in one respect. The view is overwhelming. Every astronaut, without exception, describes the view from outside the spacecraft as one of the most powerful experiences of their life. Here's something most people don't realize about spacewalks. The astronaut is not floating freely, not usually. Almost every task during an ISS EVA is performed while the astronaut is anchored to the station's exterior using tethers and foot restraints. You clip your safety tether to a wire that runs along the station's truss. You slide along the wire, moving from handhold to handhold. When you reach your work site, you lock your boots into a foot restraint, a metal platform with spring-loaded clamps that grip the boots of the suit, and you work with both hands while your feet hold you in place. The tether is essential. Without it, an astronaut who lost their grip would drift away from the station. In the frictionless environment of space, even a gentle push, kicking off too hard, bumping a tool, would send you moving in a straight line, slowly but inexorably away from the structure. The station can't chase you. It's too massive to maneuver quickly. By the time anyone could react, you'd be meters away and receding. This has almost happened. During several EVAs, astronauts have reported moments where they were briefly untethered, a clip that didn't engage properly, a moment of transition between attachment points. These moments, which last only seconds, are described with a particular kind of fear, not the dramatic terror of a disaster, but the quiet, cold fear of realizing that you are momentarily one small mistake away from drifting into the void. The protocol for a detached astronaut is called a SAFER rescue. SAFER stands for Simplified Aid for EVA Rescue, a small jetpack built into the bottom of the EMU's backpack. It contains enough nitrogen gas to provide a few meters per second of velocity change, enough, in theory, to arrest a slow drift and return to the station. Every astronaut who performs an EVA has safer training, but the system has never been used in an actual emergency. It's a last resort, and the fact that it exists tells you something about how real the risk of detachment is. The history of SAFER goes back to McCandless's MMU, actually. After the Challenger disaster in 1986 and the subsequent suspension of shuttle flights, the MMU program was discontinued. NASA decided the risk was too high and the scenarios where it was needed, primarily satellite retrieval and repair, could be addressed by other means. But the underlying capability, a small propulsion system for emergency self-rescue, was preserved in a simplified form as SAFER. McCandless's free-flying jetpack was too expensive, too complex, and too risky for routine use. But the idea of giving astronauts a way to get back if they drifted away was too important to abandon entirely. Let me tell you about the incident that every astronaut thinks about when they talk about EVA risks, because it's the incident that came closest to killing someone during a spacewalk. And it happened not because of a dramatic equipment failure, but because of water. July 16, 2013. The International Space Station, astronauts Chris Cassidy and Luca Parmitano are conducting EVA 23, a routine maintenance spacewalk. They've been outside for about an hour and a half when Parmitano reports something unusual. He feels water on the back of his head inside his helmet. In space, water doesn't drip, it doesn't run, it clings. Surface tension, which is a minor nuisance on Earth, becomes the dominant force governing liquid behavior in microgravity. A globule of water in zero gravity forms a sphere and sticks to whatever surface it touches. It doesn't flow downward because there is no downward. The water in Parmitano's helmet was coming from somewhere inside the suit, probably the drink bag or possibly the cooling system. Initially it was a small amount, annoying but not dangerous. Mission control and the astronauts discussed the situation. The water seemed to have stabilized, then it got worse. The water began to spread. It migrated across the back of Parmitano's head around the sides toward his face. In microgravity it moved not by gravity but by capillary action and by the movement of his head. Each time he turned to look at something, the water shifted, it covered his ears. He could no longer hear clearly, the water was blocking sound transmission. Then it reached his eyes, he couldn't see. The water clung to his face in a film that covered his eyes, filled his nostrils and began to approach his mouth. Parmitano was inside his own spacesuit, beginning to drown. Think about that. Drowning in a spacesuit in the vacuum of space. Not because of a hull breach or a pressure failure or any of the dramatic scenarios you might imagine, but because a small leak in the suit's water system was slowly, silently filling his helmet with water that had nowhere to drain. Mission control called for an immediate termination of the EVA. Parmitano had to make his way back to the airlock, blind and partially deaf, unable to see the handholds, relying on tactile memory and the guidance of Cassidy, who stayed close and talked him through the route. The trip back took about 15 minutes. 15 minutes of controlled, deliberate movement through a three-dimensional obstacle course, blind, with water creeping across his face, knowing that if the water covered his nose and mouth completely, he would not be able to breathe. Parmitano later described those 15 minutes as the most frightening experience of his life. He said he made a conscious decision to remain calm, not because he felt calm, but because panic would accelerate his breathing, and accelerated breathing would hasten the moment when the water blocked his airways. Calmness was not an emotional state, it was a survival strategy. He made it to the airlock. Cassidy helped him inside. The hatch was closed, the airlock was repressurized. When the support crew removed Parmitano's helmet, between 1 and 1.5 liters of water poured out. The water had completely covered his eyes, filled his ears, and partially blocked his nose. He had been minutes, perhaps less, from drowning. The subsequent investigation found that the leak was caused by contamination in the suit's cooling system. A filter that was supposed to catch debris had allowed small particles to bypass it, and those particles had clogged a water separator that was responsible for removing liquid from the airflow inside the helmet. With the separator blocked, water accumulated in the helmet instead of being routed back to the cooling system. The incident led to significant changes in EVA procedures and suit maintenance. Additional absorbent pads were added inside the helmet as a temporary water containment measure. Suit inspection and maintenance procedures were tightened, and the incident became a case study in how the most dangerous moments in spaceflight are often not the dramatic ones, not the launch, not the re-entry, not the explosive decompression, but the quiet, insidious ones, where a small malfunction cascades into a life-threatening situation through a chain of minor failures. Parmitano went on to perform another spacewalk in 2019. He said it was not easy to go back outside after what had happened, but he went. Let me tell you about the suit itself, because a spacesuit is the most remarkable garment ever created by human beings, and it deserves to be understood in detail. A spacesuit is not clothing, it is a spacecraft, a tiny, form-fitting spacecraft shaped like a human body, containing its own atmosphere, its own temperature control, its own power supply, its own communication system, and its own waste management. When an astronaut steps outside the station in an EMU, they are functionally an independent spacecraft. Everything they need to stay alive is on their body. The EMU, the extravehicular mobility unit that has been used for ISS spacewalks since 1998, consists of several major components. The hard upper torso is a rigid fiberglass shell that forms the chest and back of the suit. It's the structural core to which everything else attaches: the arms, the helmet, the life support backpack, the lower torso assembly. It comes in different sizes, and one of the ongoing challenges of EVA operations has been ensuring that the right sizes are available for the astronauts who need them. The lower torso assembly includes the pants, boots, and waist bearing. The waist bearing is a rotating joint that allows the astronaut to twist at the waist, a critical degree of freedom that early suits didn't have. The boots are not like Earth boots. They have no heels, because heels are useless in zero gravity. Instead, they have flat soles with built-in adapters that interface with the foot restraints on the station's exterior. The arms are multi-layered constructions with bearings at the shoulder, upper arm, elbow, and wrist. Each bearing allows rotation in one axis. The combination of bearings gives the arm a wide range of motion, though not as wide as a bare arm. The suit restricts movement in ways that astronauts must learn to work around: reaching above your head, reaching behind your back, crossing your arms. All of these natural human movements are difficult or impossible in the EMU. The gloves are arguably the most critical component of the suit, and they represent the most challenging engineering trade-off. The gloves must protect the astronaut's hands from vacuum, from temperature extremes that can range from plus 250 degrees Fahrenheit in sunlight to minus 250 degrees in shadow, and from micrometeorite impacts. They must maintain the suit's pressure integrity, and they must allow the astronaut to grip tools, turn bolts, connect cables, and perform fine motor tasks. This is an almost impossible set of requirements. Protection and pressure demand thick, rigid materials. Dexterity demands thin, flexible materials. The result is a compromise that satisfies neither demand fully. EMU gloves are about 2 to 3 millimeters thick at the fingertips, with multiple layers of pressure bladder, restraint fabric, thermal insulation, and micrometeorite protection. They're thicker and stiffer than winter ski gloves. Trying to grip a wrench through EMU gloves is comparable to trying to grip a wrench through oven mitts. The physical toll on the hands is severe. Astronauts routinely lose fingernails during EVA training. The repeated pressure of gripping against the suit's internal pressure causes the nails to separate from the nail beds, a condition called onycholysis. Some astronauts have their fingernails removed prophylactically before long EVA campaigns. Others tape their fingers inside the gloves to reduce friction. The glove problem is one of the most persistent and unglamorous challenges in spacesuit design. The helmet is a polycarbonate bubble that provides a wide field of view, wider than the Apollo-era helmets, though still more restricted than normal vision. The helmet is fixed, it doesn't rotate with the astronaut's head. To look left, you have to turn your entire body over the helmet visor assembly. There's an outer shell with a gold-coated sun visor that can be pulled down to block direct sunlight. Without the sun visor, looking toward the sun in space would cause immediate and permanent eye damage. The unfiltered solar radiation in space is far more intense than anything experienced on Earth's surface. Inside the helmet, there's a small foam device called a Valsalva device, a piece of foam positioned near the astronaut's nose that they can press their nose against to equalize pressure in their ears. There's a drink bag with a straw. There are the communication earphones and microphone. And there's a heads-up display that shows suit pressure, oxygen levels, battery status, and a few other critical parameters. The life support backpack, the primary life support system, or PLSS, is the most complex component. It contains the oxygen supply, 2 tanks of high-pressure gaseous oxygen that provide about 8 hours of breathing gas. It contains the carbon dioxide removal system, canisters of lithium hydroxide that chemically absorb CO2 from the circulating air. It contains the thermal control system, a sublimation-based cooling system that uses water ice to absorb heat. Water from the suit's cooling loop is routed to a porous plate exposed to vacuum. The water sublimates transitions directly from solid to gas, and the phase change absorbs heat, cooling the water that circulates through the astronaut's liquid cooling garment. It's an elegant system, but it consumes water, which means EVA duration is partly limited by the water supply. The PLSS also contains the battery, a rechargeable lithium-ion battery that powers the suit's electronics, fans, pumps, and communication system. And it contains a backup oxygen supply, a secondary system called the secondary oxygen pack that can provide about 30 minutes of emergency breathing gas if the primary system fails. All of this, the oxygen, the CO2 scrubbing, the cooling, the power, the communications, is packed into a backpack about the size of a large suitcase. An astronaut wearing an EMU is carrying their entire life support infrastructure on their back. Every breath they take is processed by that backpack. Every calorie of body heat they generate is removed by that backpack. If the backpack fails catastrophically, they have about 30 minutes to get back inside. The EMU was designed in the 1970s and has been in service with modifications for over 40 years. It is by space standards ancient technology. NASA has been trying to replace it for decades. The suits that will be used for Artemis lunar surface EVAs, the Aximo suits built by Axiom Space, represent a generational leap in spacesuit technology. They're more mobile, more comfortable, better sized for diverse body types, and designed for the specific challenges of lunar surface operations. But for ISS spacewalks, the EMU is still what we use. Aging, uncomfortable, occasionally dangerous, but proven. The fact that the EMU is still in service tells you something about how difficult it is to build a spacesuit, despite decades of effort and billions of dollars. Designing a garment that keeps a human alive in vacuum while allowing them to work productively remains one of the hardest engineering challenges in the space program. Every advancement in one area, better mobility for example, creates challenges in another, increased complexity, reduced reliability, higher costs. The spacesuit is a problem that has been solved well enough to work, but not well enough to work easily. It is in some ways the rate-limiting technology for human activity in space. I want to step back now and talk about what spacewalks have accomplished, because the cumulative achievement is staggering, and it's easy to lose sight of it amid the technical details and the near disasters. The International Space Station was assembled in orbit piece by piece over more than a decade. The station's truss structure, the backbone to which the solar arrays, radiators and modules are attached, was assembled entirely during spacewalks. Astronauts connected power cables, data cables and fluid lines between modules. They installed the station's solar arrays, unfolding them from their launch configuration and locking them into place. They installed the thermal control radiators. They replaced failed equipment, gyroscopes, pumps, batteries, antennas. The construction of the ISS required over 1,000 hours of spacewalk time. That's more than 160 spacewalks, each one planned months in advance, rehearsed dozens of times underwater, and executed with meticulous attention to procedure. The station you see in photographs, that enormous cathedral-sized structure, with its golden solar wings and its white modules gleaming against the black, was hand-built by astronauts in spacesuits, floating in vacuum, working with tools that they had to tether to their wrists to prevent them from drifting away. And the Hubble Space Telescope. Hubble has been serviced 5 times by spacewalking astronauts, and those servicing missions are among the most technically demanding EVAs ever performed. The first servicing mission, in December 1993, installed corrective optics to fix Hubble's famously flawed mirror. Astronauts Story, Musgrave and Jeffrey Hoffman spent hours replacing instruments and installing the COSTAR corrective optics package, working inside Hubble's instrument bay with the precision of surgeons. The optics were delicate, the tolerances were tight, and a single slip tool could have damaged irreplaceable hardware. They executed flawlessly. Subsequent Hubble servicing missions replaced cameras, spectrographs, gyroscopes, solar arrays, and other components. Each mission extended Hubble's operational life and upgraded its capabilities. The telescope that's still operating today, still producing groundbreaking science in 2025, 35 years after launch, is essentially a different instrument from the one that was originally deployed. Every major component has been replaced at least once, all by astronauts in spacesuits. Without EVA capability, Hubble would have been a failure, a billion-dollar telescope with a blurry mirror, deorbited and forgotten. Instead, it's one of the most productive scientific instruments in history. That transformation was achieved by human hands in space during some of the most technically demanding work ever performed by anyone, anywhere. Spacewalks have also performed emergency repairs that saved programs and possibly lives. In 2007, astronaut Scott Parazynski performed an improvised repair of a torn ISS solar array during a spacewalk that mission controllers described as one of the most dangerous EVAs in station history. The solar array had ripped during deployment, and the tear was propagating, getting worse with each thermal cycle as the station moved from sunlight to shadow and back. If the array had torn completely, the station would have lost a significant fraction of its power generation capability. Parazynski, perched at the end of the station's robotic arm, extended to its maximum reach, which wasn't quite enough. improvised a repair using materials that the crew had assembled from supplies on board. The repair required him to work near the live solar array, which carried a lethal voltage, enough to kill him instantly if he touched the wrong surface. The array was oscillating and moving as the station flexed. He was at the extreme end of his reach, working with tools that had been repurposed for a task they weren't designed for, performing a repair that had been planned in hours rather than the months that EVA procedures normally require. He pulled it off, the repair held. The solar array is still functioning today. And the photographs from that EVA, Parazinski at the tip of the boom, reaching toward the damaged array, the Earth spinning below, the station receding behind him, are some of the most visually striking images in the history of the program. Now I want to talk about something that I think is underappreciated in discussions of spacewalking, the sensory experience. What does it actually feel like to be outside, not in terms of emotions or psychology, but in terms of the physical sensations that your body perceives? The first sensation every astronaut mentions is the temperature variation in sunlight. The side of the suit facing the sun heats up rapidly. The outer surface temperature can reach 250 degrees Fahrenheit or more. The thermal insulation prevents most of this heat from reaching the astronaut's body, but you can feel a warmth on the sunlit side, a sensation of being warmed by a very powerful lamp. On the shadow side, the suit cools rapidly. The contrast can be dramatic. An astronaut working on the sunlit side of the station who rotates to face away from the sun will feel the warmth disappear and a noticeable chill replace it within seconds. When the station passes into Earth's shadow, which happens every 90 minutes, for about 35 minutes of each orbit, the temperature drops precipitously. The suit's active thermal control system compensates, but the transition from sunlight to darkness is visually and thermally dramatic. One moment you're in blazing, unfiltered sunlight, brighter and harsher than any sunlight on Earth, because there's no atmosphere to soften it. The next moment you're in darkness. Not twilight, darkness. The transition takes about 30 seconds as the station passes through the terminator, and the temperature drops noticeably, even inside the suit. The visual experience of orbital night during an EVA is remarkable. Suddenly, the station's exterior is illuminated only by helmet-mounted lights and lights on the station itself. The Earth below is dark. Cities glitter as faint points of light. Lightning flashes illuminate cloud tops in brief, silent pulses, and the air glow, a faint luminous band at the edge of the atmosphere, caused by chemical reactions in the upper atmosphere, creates a thin, ghostly ribbon around the planet's limb. And the stars come out, not gradually the way they do at sunset on Earth. Instantly, one moment the sky is black and blank, overwhelmed by the sun's glare. The next moment, the sky is filled with stars, thousands of them, steady and unwavering, without the twinkle that Earth's atmosphere creates. The Milky Way is visible as a bright, structured band, not a faint smear, but a river of light with dark lanes and bright knots. Astronauts have described the night-side sky during an EVA as the most beautiful sight they've ever seen. The suit's visor affects everything you see. The polycarbonate helmet provides decent optical clarity, but the sun visor, when deployed, adds a gold tint that changes the color balance. Some astronauts prefer to raise the sun visor during night-side operations to see the stars more clearly, though this is technically against procedure since they could inadvertently be facing the sun when the station crosses back into daylight. The physical sensation of movement in the suit is unlike anything on Earth. Every motion generates a counter-motion. If you swing your right arm, your body rotates to the left. If you push against a surface, you move away from it. Newton's third law, experienced in the most visceral way imaginable, Astronauts learn to move carefully, deliberately, minimizing extraneous motion. They use handholds not just for stability but for locomotion, pulling themselves along the station's exterior like underwater rock climbers, hand over hand. The helmet creates an interesting acoustic environment. You can hear your own breathing very clearly, louder than usual, amplified by the enclosed space. You can hear the fan that circulates air through the helmet. You can hear the sublimator hissing softly as water ice evaporates into vacuum. You can hear radio communications piped through speakers inside the helmet, but you can't hear anything outside the suit. If another astronaut is 2 feet away from you and they're banging a wrench on the station's hull, you won't hear a thing unless the vibrations travel through the structure, through a surface you're touching, through the suit's structure, and into your body. In that case, you might feel a faint vibration rather than hear a sound. Some astronauts have described a particular sensation that occurs during long EVAs, a gradual shift in their sense of up and down. At first, up is away from the Earth, down is toward it. This is natural, intuitive, consistent with a lifetime of earthbound experience. But after several hours of working on the station's exterior, rotating, inverting, attaching yourself to surfaces that face in every direction, your sense of orientation loosens, down becomes wherever your feet are pointing, or it becomes the direction of the work surface, or it disappears entirely, replaced by a three-dimensional spatial awareness that has no preferred direction. Some astronauts describe this as disorienting, others describe it as liberating, a freedom from the tyranny of gravity that they find exhilarating. I want to talk about the emotional and psychological dimension of spacewalking because this is where the story becomes most deeply human, and it's also where the official record becomes most sparse. NASA is not an organization that encourages emotional vulnerability. The astronaut culture derived from the military test pilot culture that spawned it values composure, understatement, and professional detachment. Astronauts describe their experiences using technical language. They talk about procedures, timelines, tool configurations. They rarely talk about what they felt, but some do, and when they do, the accounts are remarkable. Several astronauts have described a phenomenon that occurs during the transition from inside to outside, a moment of what can only be described as existential shock. You've been inside the station, surrounded by walls, breathing recycled air, hearing the hum of equipment, touching surfaces that other humans have touched. You're in a human environment, artificial, cramped, and imperfect, but human. And then you open the hatch and you're in the universe, not looking at it through a window in it. The difference is categorical. Nicole Stott, who performed a spacewalk during her 2009 station stay, described the moment of exiting the airlock as being born. She said the transition from the enclosed, artificial environment of the station to the open, infinite environment of space felt like emerging from a womb, a sudden, overwhelming expansion of sensory and cognitive scope. She was not being poetic. She was describing a genuine cognitive experience, the brain's attempt to process a sensory input that it has no evolutionary preparation for. Other astronauts have described something closer to vertigo, not the spinning sensation of inner ear dysfunction, but a deeper, more cognitive vertigo. The realization that there is no ground, that falling has no meaning, that the earth below is not a surface you could land on. It's a sphere you're orbiting, and the only thing keeping you from flying off into deep space is the invisible tether of gravity and the orbital mechanics you studied in textbook problems that suddenly viscerally are not abstract. Ron Garan, who performed 2 spacewalks during his ISS missions, wrote about a moment during his first EVA when he was working on the station's exterior and happened to look up, away from the station, away from the Earth, into the void. He described a sudden powerful awareness of the scale of the universe, not the intellectual knowledge that the universe is large, which he already had, but a visceral somatic experience of smallness. He felt tiny, not metaphorically, his body felt small. The sensation was physical, not philosophical. His hands tingled, his stomach dropped as if he were on a roller coaster. He had to close his eyes and focus on his breathing for several seconds before the sensation passed. This kind of response, a physical embodied reaction to the cognitive enormity of the space environment, doesn't have an established name in psychology, though it's related to the overview effect described by astronauts who see the Earth from space. The overview effect is typically associated with seeing Earth as a whole, the fragile, borderless sphere against the void. What Garan described is something slightly different, not the beauty of the Earth, but the vastness of everything else, the emptiness, the scale, the sickening realization that you are a dust mote in an infinite cathedral. Not every astronaut finds this disturbing, some find it ecstatic. Michael Lopez Alegria, who holds the record for most total EVA time by a NASA astronaut, over 67 hours across 10 spacewalks, described the experience of working outside the station as meditative. He said that after the first hour or so, the fear and the awe recede and you enter a state of focused, almost Zen-like concentration on the work. The universe is there in your peripheral vision, enormous and silent. But your hands are on the tools, and the bolts need turning, and the tasks need completing. The combination of cosmic vastness and mundane physical labor produces a mental state that he found deeply satisfying, a feeling of being simultaneously insignificant and purposeful. I think that's one of the most profound things anyone has ever said about the human experience in space. Simultaneously insignificant and purposeful. The universe doesn't care about you. It's vast beyond comprehension, old beyond imagination, and utterly indifferent to your existence. And yet here you are, outside the station, turning a bolt, fixing a pump, extending the life of a machine that generates knowledge. Your insignificance is total, your purpose is real, both things are true at the same time. Let me talk about the future of spacewalking, because it's about to change in ways that are both exciting and sobering. The Artemis program will send astronauts to the lunar surface, where they'll perform EVAs in an environment fundamentally different from the orbital environment of the ISS. Lunar EVAs involve walking, actual walking, with weight on your feet, with gravity pulling you downward, with a surface beneath you made of fine, abrasive, electrostatically charged regolith. The Apollo astronauts discovered that lunar surface EVA was a very different experience from orbital EVA, and the Artemis astronauts will rediscover this. On the ISS, astronauts move by pulling themselves along handholds. Their feet are often irrelevant. They float freely unless locked into foot restraints. Core strength and upper body strength are paramount. On the Moon, astronauts will move by walking, hopping, and, if the Apollo experience is any guide, by a kind of loping, bouncing gait that exploits the 1/6 gravity. Lower body strength and balance become important. The entire biomechanics of EVA activity change. The suits change too. Orbital EVA suits are optimized for floating. They need to be flexible at the arms and hands because that's where the work happens. Lunar surface suits need to be flexible at the legs and waist because walking and bending are critical. The Aximu suits being developed for Artemis incorporate much better lower body mobility than the EMU, better hip joints, better knee joints, better ankle flexibility. An Artemis astronaut should be able to walk more naturally, bend at the waist to pick up a rock, and kneel to examine a surface feature, things that Apollo astronauts found difficult or impossible in their suits. But the lunar surface poses challenges that orbital EVA doesn't. Dust, as I've discussed in other videos, is the most pernicious. Lunar regolith is fine, sharp, and electrostatically clingy. It will get into every joint, every seal, every mechanism on the suit. It will scratch visors, it will degrade thermal coatings, it will work its way into the suit's bearings and reduce their mobility. Dust mitigation is one of the most critical unresolved challenges for sustained lunar EVA. The thermal environment is also different. On the ISS, the station provides periodic shade, and the astronaut rotates through sunlight and shadow as the station orbits. On the Moon, near the South Pole, the sun is always near the horizon. One side of the astronaut is always in sunlight, the other side is always in shadow. The temperature difference between the two sides can be extreme, hundreds of degrees, and the suit's thermal control system must handle this asymmetric loading. And then there's the question of EVA duration. Apollo moonwalks lasted between 2 and 7 hours. Artemis EVAs are planned to be longer, potentially up to 8 hours per EVA, with multiple EVAs per mission. The cumulative time on the surface could be days. This means the suit needs to be not just functional but comfortable, or at least tolerable over extended periods. Chafing, pressure points, sweat management, hand fatigue, all of these become more serious as EVA duration increases. The astronauts who walk on the Moon during Artemis will be doing something that humans haven't done in over 50 years, and they'll be doing it in suits that are better, on a surface that's less explored, in a region, the South Pole, that Apollo never visited. They will be, in a very real sense, pioneers again. But there's an even more dramatic future for EVA that I want to discuss, and it's one that's rarely addressed in popular space coverage: spacewalking during deep space missions. When humans eventually travel to Mars, and they will, though the timeline remains uncertain, they may need to perform EVAs during the transit. Not on the Martian surface, that's a different challenge, but during the 7-month journey through interplanetary space between Earth and Mars, in the void between worlds. Why would you need to go outside during a transit? Maintenance, repair, inspection. Over 7 months, equipment can degrade. Surfaces can be damaged by micrometeorite impacts, antennas can misalign, thermal blankets can come loose. If something breaks on the exterior of the Mars transit vehicle, someone has to go outside and fix it, but going outside during a Mars transit is different from going outside in Earth orbit. In Earth orbit, you have the relative safety of proximity. The station is there, 100 meters above or below you, and if things go catastrophically wrong, you're hours away from Earth. During a Mars transit, you're weeks or months from any help. The nearest human-made structure is the vehicle you just exited. The nearest planet with breathable air is receding behind you at kilometers per second. If your suit fails, if your tether breaks, if a tool punctures your glove, there is no rescue mission. There is no abort. There is only the crew aboard your ship with the limited medical supplies and repair capabilities they brought with them. The psychological burden of this scenario is qualitatively different from ISS EVA. On the ISS, you know that you're in low Earth orbit, that rescue spacecraft are available, that the ground support team is monitoring every system, that the worst-case scenario, while terrible, is at least bounded by the proximity of Earth. During a Mars transit EVA, the worst-case scenario is unbounded. You are truly on your own. NASA has done almost no research on EVA operations during deep space transit because no such mission has ever been conducted and none is imminent. But the psychological and operational challenges are being studied theoretically, and they're sobering. How do you train someone for a spacewalk where the nearest hospital is 100 million miles away? How do you maintain EVA proficiency during a 7-month transit? How do you manage the psychological impact of repeated exposures to the void of interplanetary space, knowing that each one is a potential catastrophe from which there is no recovery? These questions don't have answers yet. They will need answers before humans go to Mars. I want to return now to Bruce McCandless because his story doesn't end with that famous photograph in 1984. And the rest of his life tells you something important about what spaceflight does to the people who do it. After STS-41B, The mission where he performed the first untethered spacewalk, McCandless flew one more shuttle mission, STS-31, in 1990. That mission deployed the Hubble Space Telescope into orbit. McCandless was the astronaut who operated the shuttle's robotic arm to lift Hubble out of the cargo bay and release it into space. So the man who performed the first untethered spacewalk also helped place the most important telescope in history into orbit. That's not a bad resume. McCandless retired from NASA in 1990. He worked in the aerospace industry for several years and then settled into a quiet retirement. He gave occasional interviews and public talks. He was unfailingly modest about his achievement, describing the untethered spacewalk in technical terms, emphasizing the engineering of the MMU rather than the drama of the experience. But in some interviews, when pressed, he revealed glimpses of what it had actually been like. He spoke about the silence, not the absence of sound. There was sound inside the helmet, the hiss of oxygen, the whir of fans, but the absence of context, no wind, no traffic, no voices except the crackle of the radio. A silence that was less auditory than existential. The silence of being in a place where human beings are not meant to be. He spoke about the view, the earth below, impossibly beautiful, impossibly detailed. He could see individual atolls in the Pacific, the braided channels of river deltas, the geometric patterns of farmland, and above the stars more than he had ever seen, steady and cold, arranged in constellations that he knew from childhood, but that looked different somehow from out here. As if the constellations were the same, but his relationship to them had changed. He spoke about the moment he turned around and looked back at the shuttle. It was 100 meters away. A white shape orbiting the Earth at 5 miles per second, getting neither closer nor farther because they were in the same orbit, moving at the same speed. The shuttle looked small, not small the way a building looks small from a distance, small the way everything human looks small when you see it against the background of the universe. McCandless died on December 21, 2017, at the age of 80. In accordance with his wishes, his cremated remains were scattered at sea. He had spent most of his career as a naval aviator and astronaut, and the sea was where he felt he belonged, on the boundary between one element and another, between the known world and the vast unknown. I think about McCandless sometimes when I look at that photograph. The white figure, the black void, the blue planet. It's become such an iconic image that it's easy to forget what it represents. Not a triumph of technology, though it is that, but a triumph of will. The human being chose to let go, chose to trust the machine on his back, chose to face the void without a lifeline. That choice was not made in a moment of crisis. It was made calmly, deliberately. After years of preparation, McCandless had been training for the MMU since the early 1970s. He had spent more than a decade preparing for a single act, the act of letting go. When the moment came, he was ready. Not because he wasn't afraid. He later said he was aware of the risk. He was afraid. But the preparation was greater than the fear. I want to talk about something that connects all of these stories. Leonov's inflating suit, Parmitano's flooding helmet, McCandless's free flight, the construction of the ISS, the repair of Hubble. The connecting thread is trust. Every spacewalk is an act of trust. Trust in the suit, that it will hold pressure, maintain temperature, supply oxygen, remove carbon dioxide, and generally keep you alive in an environment that wants you dead. Trust in the tools that their workers designed, that the bolts will turn, that the connectors will connect. Trust in the training that the hours spent underwater have prepared you for the reality of vacuum. Trust in your crewmates that they'll have your back, monitor your suit telemetry, guide you home if your visor fogs or your helmet fills with water. Trust in mission control that the engineers on the ground have identified the risks, planned for contingencies, and will talk you through any anomaly. and trust in yourself that you will remain calm when things go wrong, that your hands will find the handholds in the dark, that your training will override your panic, that you will make the right decision when the right decision is not obvious. This trust is not blind, it's earned. It's built over months and years of training, testing, simulating, rehearsing. Astronauts trust their suits because they've spent hundreds of hours in them. They trust mission control because they've worked with those controllers through dozens of simulated emergencies. They trust their crewmates because they've trained together, lived together, and developed the deep functional familiarity that allows one person to read another's stress level from the tone of their voice on the radio. But earned trust is still trust. It's still a leap. You can test a suit 1,000 times and it can pass every test. And on the 1,001st time, the time that counts, the time you're actually in vacuum, it might fail. Probability is not certainty. Statistical reliability is not absolute reliability. Every astronaut who exits the airlock knows this. They know that the suit has been tested, that the odds are overwhelmingly in their favor, and that something could still go wrong. They step outside anyway. There's a word for this, for acting despite acknowledged risk, with full knowledge of the consequences of failure. The word is courage. And I think it's underused in discussions of spaceflight, because the culture of spaceflight, the test pilot culture, the engineering culture, the NASA culture downplays it. Astronauts don't call themselves courageous. They call themselves prepared. They say they're managing risk. They say they trust the hardware. But courage is what it is, walking into a situation where you might die, knowing that you might die and doing it anyway because the thing you're doing matters. That's courage. It doesn't matter whether you call it that. It doesn't matter whether you feel afraid or calm or somewhere in between. The act itself is what counts. And every astronaut who has ever floated in the void, tethered or untethered, afraid or exhilarated, has performed that act. Let me talk about something that I think about often, and that doesn't get discussed enough. The aesthetics of spacewalking. The beauty of it. Not the beauty of the view, I've talked about that, but the beauty of the act itself, the grace of it. If you watch footage of experienced astronauts during EVAs, particularly the long, complex EVAs performed during ISS construction, you'll notice something. They move beautifully. Not quickly, not dramatically, but with a fluid, economical grace that comes from deep practice in an unusual environment. They pull themselves along the station's exterior with smooth, controlled motions. They rotate their bodies to orient themselves toward their work site with a twist of the torso and a flick of the wrist. They transfer tools from one hand to another with a precision that accounts for the tool's tendency to float away. They anchor themselves in foot restraints with a practiced click of the boots. The movements are slow. You can't hurry in a spacesuit, but they're efficient. There's no wasted motion. This is the beauty of competence, the beauty that emerges when a human being has trained so long and so deeply in a task that the task becomes a kind of dance. You see the same beauty in a surgeon's hands during a complex procedure, or a musician's fingers during a difficult passage, or a rock climber's body moving up a difficult route. It's the beauty of the human body doing what it has been trained to do in an environment that demands nothing less than excellence. I find this beauty moving in a way that's hard to articulate. There's something deeply human about it, about the combination of vulnerability and competence, of fragility and skill. The astronaut is the most fragile thing in the picture. The suit could fail, the tether could break, a micrometeorite could puncture the glove, the universe is trying to kill them. And yet they move with grace, with purpose, with the quiet confidence of someone who has prepared for this moment for years. There are about 260 people who have performed spacewalks. That number will grow slowly. A few new spacewalkers are added each year as new crew members cycle through ISS rotations, but it's a small number, smaller than the number of people who have summited Everest, smaller than the number of people who have visited the bottom of the Mariana Trench. These are the people who have gone outside, who have crossed the boundary between the human world and the universe, who have floated in the void and done useful work there and come back. Each one of them has a story. Each one has a moment, the moment the hatch opened, the moment they saw the Earth without a window frame around it, the moment they realized, in a way that no amount of training could prepare them for, where they were and what they were doing. Those moments are, I think, among the most significant experiences that human beings have ever had. Not because of what they accomplished, though the accomplishments are real, but because of what they revealed about who we are. We are a species that evolved on the plains of East Africa, under open skies, in an atmosphere of nitrogen and oxygen, in a gravitational field of 9.8 meters per second squared. Every cell in our bodies is tuned to that environment. Our lungs breathe that air. Our muscles fight that gravity. Our eyes see by light filtered through that atmosphere. We are, in every biological sense, creatures of Earth. We belong here. And yet we go out there, we build machines that let us survive where we were never meant to survive. We design suits that create a tiny bubble of Earth around our bodies and carry it into the void. We train until the alien becomes familiar. And then we open the hatch and step outside into a place that our bodies were never designed for, that our ancestors never imagined, that our evolution never anticipated. We do this because we're curious, because we want to know what's out there, because there's a question that every human child asks us at some point: what's beyond the sky? And we are the generation that has begun to answer it. Not with stories or myths or speculation, but with our own hands, our own eyes, our own breathing bodies, floating in the dark, 250 miles above the Earth, doing the work that makes the answer possible. That's what spacewalking is. It's not just a technical activity. It's not just a means of building and maintaining infrastructure in orbit. It's a statement, a declaration that we are not limited to the environment that made us, that we can go where we were never meant to go, survive where we were never meant to survive, and work competently, gracefully, purposefully in the most hostile environment that exists. Bruce McCandless floating free 100 meters from the shuttle with nothing between him and infinity. That image is a statement. It says, we can do this, we can let go, we can face the void without a lifeline, we can trust ourselves, our tools, our preparation. We can be alone in the universe and still function, still work, still maintain our humanity. That's not a small thing in a universe that is, by every measure, indifferent to our existence. The ability to maintain our humanity, to keep working, keep thinking, keep doing useful things, is perhaps the most remarkable thing about us. The universe doesn't care. We care anyway. I want to end with a thought about the future, because spacewalking is not going to remain what it is now. It's going to change profoundly over the coming decades. The next generation of spacewalks will happen on the moon. Astronauts will walk on the lunar surface in new suits, performing geological surveys, deploying instruments, collecting samples, building the first elements of permanent infrastructure. These walks will be longer, more physically demanding, and more scientifically productive than Apollo moonwalks, because the suits are better, the training is better, and the mission objectives are more ambitious. The generation after that will walk on Mars. The first EVA on Mars will be the most significant single moment in the history of human exploration. The moment when a human being steps onto the surface of another planet, looks up at a butterscotch-colored sky, and breathes the air of a world they cannot breathe. The first footprint on Martian soil will last for thousands of years in a landscape that has been unchanged for millions. And eventually, not in our lifetimes, probably not in our grandchildren's lifetimes, but eventually humans will perform EVAs in environments we can barely imagine, in the vicinity of asteroids, where gravity is so weak that you could jump off the surface and never come back. on the moons of Jupiter and Saturn, where the radiation environment is lethal and the landscapes are shaped by forces we're still trying to understand. Perhaps in the rings of Saturn, or in the atmosphere of a gas giant, or in the void between stars, on a journey that takes generations. Each of these EVAs will require new suits, new tools, new procedures, new psychology. Each will be harder than the last. Each will push the boundaries of what the human body and mind can endure, and each will be performed by someone who has chosen, freely, knowingly, courageously, to open a hatch and step outside. When I look at that photograph of Bruce McCandless, the white figure against the black, the earth below, the universe above, I see all of this. I see the past, Leonov inflating, Cernan sweating, Parmitano drowning, Musgrave fixing Hubble. I see the present astronauts on the ISS working in the void, building and maintaining a structure that represents the best of what international cooperation can achieve. And I see the future, footprints on the moon, bootprints on Mars, the slow, stubborn expansion of human presence into a cosmos that never invited us but can't seem to keep us out. We are a spacewalking species. We don't just look at the void, we go into it, we put on suits and we step outside and we work. We turn bolts and connect cables and replace batteries 250 miles above the Earth, moving at 5 miles per second in a silence so complete that it feels like the end of all sound. And we do it because the work needs doing, because the station needs maintaining, because the telescope needs fixing, because the knowledge needs gathering, because the future needs building. And because somewhere in the back of every mind that has ever looked up at the stars and wondered, there's a voice that says, I want to go out there. Bruce McCandless listened to that voice. He trained for 16 years, and then he opened the hatch and floated into nothing. No tether, no cable, no rope, just a man in a suit 100 meters from the nearest wall, alone in the universe, doing something that no one had ever done. The photograph captures about 1/1,000,000th of what that must have felt like, but it's what we have. That small white figure, that infinite black background, that blue planet curving below, it's an image of human courage, human trust, human stubbornness, an image of a species that has no business being in space and goes there anyway, an image that says we let go, and we didn't fall, we flew. Thank you for listening tonight. I know it was a long journey from Leonov's inflating suit to McCandless's free flight, from Parmitano's flooding helmet to the future footprints on Mars. But I think these stories deserve to be told together because they're all part of the same story, the story of human beings learning to work in the one environment that is truly alien, truly hostile, and truly beautiful. The next time you look up at the night sky, think about this. Somewhere up there right now, there are people living and working in the void. They're sleeping in sleeping bags tethered to walls, eating food from pouches, running experiments, fixing equipment, looking out the window at the earth rolling below, and sometimes on special days, after months of preparation, they put on suits, open a hatch, and step outside, into nothing, into everything, into the silence of a universe that doesn't know their names but is being changed, slowly, carefully, one spacewalk at a time, by the fact that they came good night.